This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We've been really mourning the loss of one of our greatest artists of the 20th century, the great Brian Wilson of the Beatles. But now we're going to switch focuses and we're going to talk about making money, because that's what this show is all about. And so who better to talk to than Rob Arnott, who's one of the top financial gurus in this country. He is the CEO of Research Affiliates. And Rob, thanks so much for joining this afternoon.
Thanks for the invitation. Always good to hear your voice.
So, Rob, the first question I have to ask you, Beatles or Beach Boys?
Oh, my goodness. I'm more of a Rolling Stones guy, but I love all three groups.
Me too. I mean, it's those three groups, I think, were the great groups of the 60s. And so I love the Stones as well. All right, let's talk about the economy. Let's talk a little bit about, well, first of all, I want your advice. I want to talk about the new study that you've done on the growth of government and the impact that it has on the economy. But before we get to that, I think our listeners just want your advice about, it looks like the economy is improving. We've had a pretty good couple of months on the stock market. What do you do if you're an investor these days?
Well, the thing you should never do is panic, but the other thing you can do is look more broadly. Everybody's familiar with the Magnificent Seven and the S&P 500 and Russell 1000, and they've all been absolutely phenomenal. Past returns are not future returns, and so it's often very instructive to ask, what are people not talking about? What markets are not interesting to people? Because usually those are overlooked and relatively inexpensive. So
you're saying don't go with the crowd.
Yeah, or at least carve out decent chunks of your money to not go with the crowd, because the crowd will get you in trouble once in a while. And this does look and feel to me a lot like 2000, the dot-com bubble.
It does.
The Magnificent Seven, these companies are brilliant companies reinventing our future. Absolutely no question about it. But it's not as if the market's unaware of that, and it's not as if it's not already 100% in the price.
I see.
So therein lies the challenge. We look at future returns. Of course, everybody looks at past returns. That's easy. But we look at future returns and recognize that there are three parts to it. One, what income are you getting from the investment? Two, how is that income going to grow in the years ahead? And three, is it expensive or cheap relative to historic norms? And if so, is there any mean reversion likely to come back and bite us? So any market that has soared will have wonderful past returns, but won't necessarily have wonderful future returns.
So my wife, who's our stock picker in the Moore household, because I'm not very good at this, and she bought NVIDIA a few years ago, and we made a lot of money on that stock. It's been up and down, but mostly up, and we bought it pretty cheap. So do we hold on to it?
Imagine this: the best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
My name is Lily, and I've had hidradenitis suppurativa, HS, for years. I finally found some relief since taking Cosentyx. Relief means I can show up more.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe hidradenitis suppurativa, HS. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your dermatologist about Cosentyx.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
I would pare it back. I would take some of those wonderful gains and then ask the question, what's cheap? Europe is a little cheap for obvious reasons. I mean, Europe has eurosclerosis. It's can't get out of its own way when it comes to overregulating and so forth. But the yield is over 3%, and add a 3% yield on top of just perfectly ordinary economic growth, and you wind up with an 8% return, which you're not going to get from U.S. stocks at today's valuation multiples.
I'm talking to Rob Arnott, who is the head of research affiliates and one of the top financial advisors in the country and has an incredible record over the last 30 or 40 years to prove it. So, Rob, I don't know if this question is in your wheelhouse or not, but there's a big debate in Washington going on about the Fed. And whether the Fed should be, I'm sure you're following this, President Trump wants the Fed to be cutting rates. I'm kind of on the fence on that. I mean, the inflation numbers have come in pretty well, but, we're still running at about 2 to 2.5% inflation, which is a little bit above the Fed target. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or what, if you were running the Fed, what would you be doing?
Well, firstly, the Fed claims to be data dependent. That's just total bull.
Right.
They claim to be apolitical. That's total bull. How can you do a 50 basis point rate cut in the face of inflation that was still running a little hot, an economy that
it was outrageous, right before the election.
Right before the election. Obvious intent to sway the election.
Yeah.
And now they.
And by the way, the thing that's so hypocritical about that, Rob. Sorry to interrupt, but you're right. And if you your chairman Jerome Powell is so sanctimonious, like, oh, we don't take politics into account, and then they cut the interest rates right before the election to juice the economy to help Kamala Harris. Right.
And now today they won't cut unless they have absolutely no choice because they don't want to do Trump any favors.
Yeah.
So it's a totally politicized organization. If you want to be data dependent, you might ask the question, okay, what's the normal real interest rate on short-term government bonds? It's 1 to 2%. What's the inflation rate? It's 2 to 2.5%. That points you squarely in the direction of 3 to 4% as a natural short rate today. And there is absolutely no reason they can't cut modestly. Now, do I think that we should ever return to zero interest rates or negative interest rates? No, that was a pathology. That wasn't just a mistake. Yes. That was a pathology.
Yes. Okay, so I agree with you. I think you put it very well. Now let's talk about your study, because I love your study. We've put that up. We posted that on our website at Unleash Prosperity. And it basically, well, you'll have to explain it better than I can, but as I look at it, basically looking at what is the relationship between the size of government and the performance of the American economy. And by the way, earlier on the show, I had Phil Graham on, the great former senator of Texas, who has a great new book out on the triumph of free market economics. But it seems like, your study is pretty self-evident that when you get government over a certain level of spending, then the economy takes a big hit. So can you explain what you did?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, the orthodoxy across policy community and the economics community is stimulus stimulates. If the government spends money, it revitalizes the animal spirits of the private sector. Total bunk. Money that is spent either comes out of taxes or out of borrowing.
Yes.
Either way, it's being siphoned straight out of the private sector economy.
That's right.
To be laundered through government and then pushed out to pick winners and losers. That's not a formula for growth. The formula for growth is to empower the private sector and let the private sector do the innovations that it does so well. So what we did is we went back historically. There's a short version of the study entitled Stimulus Doesn't Stimulate. There's a long version entitled Does Fiscal Stimulus Stimulate? As a question instead of a statement.
Right.
Both versions are well worth a read. If you just go on Google and put my name, Arnott, Stimulus Doesn't Stimulate, it'll pop right up. Anyway, bottom line is, what we did is we went back historically and we asked a very simple question. On a rolling 5-year basis, does higher spending correlate with higher growth? And the simple fact is it doesn't. You go back over the last 60 years, there's not a single 5-year span in which higher spending countries grew faster than lower spending countries. And it's not as if 60 years is such a short span that you don't have different countries at both ends of the spectrum at different times in the last 60 years. It works cross-sectionally. The high-spending governments grow slower. It works intertemporally, meaning that in any individual country, if the spending is going up, the growth is going down, and if the spending is going down, the growth is going up. Ireland's a beautiful example of the latter. Japan is a beautiful example of the former. Japan was the world's leader for growth in the 80s, and it's the world's leader for stalled economy these days.
You mean Japan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is that? So Japan, you're right. Japan post World War II, had this massive, recovery from, the country had been bombed to smithereens and had amazing economic recovery. And remember, in the early 80s, that's when I first got started my career. Remember, Rob, everybody said, "Oh, it's the Japan model. Japan's going to take over the world. They're going to take over the United States. We have to be more like Japan." So what happened? They just kept growing their government. How is it that their economy stalled out?
When you're a successful economy, you start to feel like you can do everything for everyone. And so the narrative at the time was that Japan could afford to have a robust safety net and could afford to have roads to nowhere and so forth and so on. And they started to spend more and more and more. And the consequences, their growth got slower and slower and slower. Singapore, back in 1960, was poorer than Malaysia, and was approximately 1/5 as wealthy as the U.S. per capita. It's now about 30% richer than the United States per capita.
Wait a minute. Do you mean the average Singapore resident is richer than the average American resident?
Exactly.
Wow.
Not just in terms of wealth, but also in terms of income.
Wow.
And what's their secret? Their spending is 15% of GDP. That's it.
I mean, you mean their government spending?
Yeah, government spending.
Yeah, right.
You need government to function. You need rule of law. You need defense. You need borders. You need fire and police, and you need roads. And
of course,
and these are all very necessary, but they don't cost 40% of GDP. So in our study, what we found was that there's a sweet spot from 15 to 30% of GDP where normal growth is 2 to 6% per year per individual, meaning that per capita wealth is growing 2 to 6% per year over and above inflation.
So let me go.
And,
hold on. Let me hold on, because I want to make a lot of our listeners are just casual. You're not economists. They're not statisticians. So you said that the kind of sweet zone is when government is between 15 and 30% of GDP. That sounds a little high to me, but I'll accept that. So, but there's a big difference between 15% and 30%, right? 30% is twice as high as 15.
15 and 30, and
what's that?
30 is where it starts to slow down.
Slow down. So where are we? So in the United States, we're about 40%, right?
We're just under 40. Europe is almost all between 40 and 55%. In the 40 to 60% range,
that's bad.
You get growth of 0 to 2%.
And that's Europe for you. So that explains the eurosclerosis. Now, taxes matter too, right? I mean, if you have very, very high tax rates, that's going to have a negative effect on the willingness to produce
Milton
as well.
Friedman famously pointed out that the correct measure of taxation is spending, because if it doesn't come out of the taxpayer's pocket, it gets taken out in borrowing. Which people think that saddles future generations with debt. No, it's immediate. It's money out of the private sector immediately.
Okay, so we're just coming to the end here. We only have about a minute and a half left. So I want to hammer this point home because it's so important, Rob. Your study is a great one. So if we could lower our government spending by 10 percentage point of GDP, in other words, go from 40% to 30% of GDP, our economy would grow much faster and Americans would be richer.
Yeah, you'd probably see 3 to 4% growth per capita, which means with population growing, you'd be looking at 3.5 to 4.5, plus inflation, of course. But 3-4% real growth in the economy per year means wealth is doubling every 20 years. It's
a great study. That's what we want. And we've done that before, and we can do it again as a country. We just have to, the depressing part, as you know, Rob, the Republicans are just trying to make little teeny-weeny cuts in the government. Teeny cuts.
Bipartisan embrace of overspending.
Awful. Okay. Well, Rob Arnott, you're very nice to come on the show on a Saturday afternoon and spread your wisdom. The name of the study again is?
Does stimulus stimulate? Or the alternate title for the short version is Stimulus Doesn't Stimulate.
Yeah, and that is a great study, and it is absolutely true. Stimulus does not stimulate, folks. That's the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. To quote the great Brian Wilson, God only knows what I'd do without you. Have a great weekend, folks, and we'll be back next week.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.